Welcome to the Enlighten Up podcast, where I am going to take you into a deep exploration of what it means to exist in this current reality. We are going to raise your vibes, open your mind, expand your heart, and dive deep into the wondrous mysteries and possibilities of this lifetime. There's been a spiritual catalyst that has set in motion the awakening process of many across the globe to return to the knowingness of self and unite what has been separated. Together, we're going to bring light into that darkness. We're going to remember the joy of living. But most of all, we're going to turn up the volume of our own eternal power and do the thing we're here to do. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Enlighten Up podcast. I'm really happy to be here with you this week. I have a brand new guest to introduce you to on this show. He is the author of the book, Searching in Silence. He is the host of the podcast, Soul Wisdom Stories. And he is an intuitive life coach and soul searcher. Welcome, Vipul Bhesania, to the show. How are you doing today? It is so great to have you here.
Nicole, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here as well. For anyone listening right now, I would invite you, whether you're a first-time listener or been listening for a while, to drop Nicole a review or a rating, because from the little that I've kind of researched about the stuff that you've done and the conversation we had, you've put a lot of time and energy into building a podcast. It's not an easy thing to do, to be consistent. You've obviously done it for the last, 6 years now. With over 200 episodes. So I invite anyone to just, show their love and support by leaving you a review and a rating. So
thank you. It's those little things that people don't realize make a huge difference in
they do, yeah.
You in your path. So I know that many of you are going to love this episode. Vipul has so much wisdom to impart with you, and he has an incredible journey that he's going to share. And I think we should just jump right into it.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Because, you were introduced to me through my friend Lisa Roche, who was on our podcast here a couple of times. And she spoke very highly of you, and she thought that we would get along great. And I'm so glad she introduced us. You are in your early 30s. Is that correct?
I'm 30. I'm 30.
So you're 30. So you're very, very, very new early 30s. Yeah. Your journey has taken you in some very deep valleys that come followed by some peaks. But you weren't always here at the peak of coaching and writing a book about spiritual development and that inner journey of, that requires so much silence. It requires silence to really get to know who you are. So if you were to kind of look at who you are today versus who you were, maybe even, I guess, 15 years ago, is that when your journey really started?
Yeah, I would say probably. I mean, with the spiritual awakening in terms of my health, that was in 2012. But when we talk about the journey really starting, I mean, do you want to go back to age 0 when I was born in this body, or we can go back lifetimes and lifetimes before that? Because the journey really began way before I came into this body. But the way I see it is that I'm just picking up from where I left off the last time. Whatever I've done in my last life or lifetimes, I'm carrying that wisdom through to continue on a lifelong soul evolution, soul journey, and helping to help other souls along the way as much as I can, and have other souls help me on my journey. I think we're all interconnected and interwoven in that way. So I think the biggest milestone to probably begin with is in 2012, as it probably is for a lot of people, but 2012 only in hindsight, because when I was in the moment, it wasn't something that I saw as significant. I saw it as a a burden. And I really began to hate myself because I thought I'm going down a path that's very different to everyone else who's in their early 20s. So I was in my second year of university, going into my third year. I was studying law at the University of Kent. And essentially, what would happen was my skin, literally overnight, had become inflamed with eczema and hives all over my body from head to toe. And I'd never suffered a health kind of issue before that. So I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, why is this happening all of a sudden? I've not really changed much in my diet. I've not really changed my lifestyle. It's kind of eating and drinking the same thing. So why all of a sudden has this happened? So I go and seek answers on campus to the doctor. That's the first thing you do. You're right. I'm going to call the doctor and find out what the hell's wrong with me. And the first time I remember feeling a little bit suspicious about the information I was being told was I was referred to a specialist on campus, a dermatologist, right? So I was like, okay, maybe this will solve my problems and I'll get an answer because it's a specialist. And turns out she was a PhD student. So at that time, because I still hadn't had a degree, I was still studying. I thought, oh, PhD, like she's super clever. Like she should have some kind of answers for me. She was looking in a textbook. And I was like, why are you looking in a textbook? Like, like you're studying this thing. Like, do you not have the answers? And then I asked up front, I was like, so where does eczema and hives come from? Like, what's the cause of it? And she said, there is no like clear cause. Like if you Google it, you'll see the symptoms, and you'll probably read like other alternative therapies and medicinal routes that you could take. I was like, well, that's not leaving me with a lot of confidence because I feel like I'm coming to the specialist to get the answer and I didn't get it. And then I come back home because the university was outside of London. Come back home, see the local GP, same thing. Like we don't really know where it comes from. Could be from your parents, could be genetic. And your body can change overnight. Maybe today you're suffering with this, and then tomorrow it might switch back. So I was like, okay, but I still wasn't quite satisfied. And then I started to, because I didn't have any other answers, I started to get on to harder and harder medicine. So I was on steroid creams and steroid tablets and like these really thick oils. And my outer appearance looked entirely different to when I was at school the few years prior to that. And so who I was looking at in the mirror, I did not recognize. And so that's when like anxiety and low self-esteem and like a ton of self-hate started to creep in because I was like, I don't even recognize the person in the mirror and I couldn't look at myself for a very long time. So I broke that
okay, may I
relationship.
just pause you there for a second?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's a really big realization, or even just to the awareness of that. Because if you think about the body, to me, it's always been one of my greatest messengers of truths that I'm denying or avoiding within myself. And there was probably a part of you that didn't recognize yourself anymore on the inside. And so it started to express itself through this eczema and hives.
Yeah, definitely. I think there was multi-layered things going on that I couldn't put a pulse on at the time. I just didn't have a clue. And I literally thought what was happening to me was all external. Like I thought there was physically something wrong with my skin. Obviously now I know in hindsight it's something that's wrong with the gut. There's a lot of inflammation. And so the skin is actually a mirror for the internal health of the body. Same as the tongue. It's a mirror for the internal health of the body. So you can look in your eyes, you can look on your tongue and on your skin to see the internal health for the most part. So here I am basically searching for answers in terms of medical answers whilst I'm studying. And in the meantime, frustration's building because everyone's out drinking, partying, they're eating whatever they want to eat. And I was up to this point, and now I'm hindered because all of a sudden I'm allergic to gluten and dairy. I can't drink alcohol. I had to stop eating meat. So I was trying all these different things. And what was deceiving at the time was that the medicine I was given, the really strong stuff, worked like magic overnight. So I was like, oh, okay, I want to go back for more and more. And I got almost hooked to the fact that, oh, this brings back my appearance. This brings back my confidence and suppresses the pain. So let me go back and get more. And they warned me that it's going to stop working because it's a short-term thing. And it did. And that made me even more depressed because I was like, oh shit, this doesn't work now. After a few doses, it stopped working. And little did I know it affected my kidney and liver. Long term, it would affect my kidney and liver should I continue it. So I stopped taking it. And then what I didn't realize was what was happening was my spiritual identity was almost um, being shed like a snake skin. And I was being reborn into this new person, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. It was a journey from 2012. The worst of it is 2012 to probably 2019. And after that, the next milestone, which we'll get to shortly, but the next milestones kind of began. And I felt like um, I was really finally beginning to heal on deeper levels in terms of my physical body. And so then I could work on a more emotional and spiritual level and do work on that level at that time. But yeah, 2012 was when the physical body started to deteriorate and break down. So that version of me was destroyed and a new version was being born and birthed into the world. And one last thing to say about that was what also started happening was very interesting was the person I was living with at the time, one of my best friends, he also began to have a somewhat of a spiritual awakening. He didn't have physical symptoms, but internally you could tell the things that he was interested in started to change drastically. The same thing happened to me. We're studying law and we've been conditioned by the schooling system up to this point. I've not read any books on spirituality. Upbringing hasn't influenced me in any way. Wasn't really religious, and I hadn't studied anything apart from the regular curriculum. And so now I'm having conversations all of a sudden at the age of 20, I think it was about 20 at that time, about spirituality and the meaning of God and what actually are plants and what actually is gravity. And do we actually believe science? Science is just a description of the activity that's happening, but what is the thing behind that that's animating it? Essentially, what we were interested in is consciousness, but I didn't have the terminology for it at the time. And we were having 3 or 4 hours of conversation a day about this, and it was coming from nowhere. Like, just it was just being downloaded, and we were just talking and talking and talking and asking all these questions, and that just piqued our curiosity to explore more and more around destiny and faith and spirituality and personal development. And the more I started watching stuff online, the more I started to find these different teachers, and I was interested in so much stuff that was completely different to what I was studying at the time, right? So I started to buy books and watch movies and watch documentaries, all to do with this kind of stuff. And so I was immersed and I was addicted to growth at that time. I was like, wow, okay, my physical body's breaking down. Let me begin to do my own research around that. But here's also the spiritual and mental aspect of how I can grow and learn and develop in new ways that I've never been taught before.
Your journey started in 2012, and the most difficult period lasted until about 2019, until like you really start to notice a major shift. And I think that's important to kind of touch on, because so many people will see, like, we'll talk about our dark night of the soul, which I think we go through several of them through our lifetime. And the dark night of the soul is obviously not a night. It can be years, and in some cases, for some people, even a decade or more. And I know that there are some people in my audience that are going through some very difficult challenges and times in their life that have been going on for years at a time. What do you say to people when they are going through that? Really, they're really in the thick of it. They're in the trenches, and they are starting to lose hope or understanding that the light is at the end of the tunnel. Like, what's your advice, or how do you perceive that, or share knowledge to help people get through the difficult times? Because it's often where we feel like we're ready to give up is when we're just about to break through to the other side.
Yeah, there's I'm sure whoever's listening and yourself probably heard this story before, but it's the story of the Chinese bamboo tree, which I absolutely love. I'm not sure if you've heard it, but the Chinese bamboo tree has to be watered. Once it's planted, it has to be watered 5 years in a row, and there's no growth whatsoever. And as the fifth year begins to end and the sixth year starts, it grows 90 feet tall in 6 weeks. But for the first 5 years, you don't see nothing. And I often like to look at nature as a mirror image of how we work, because we're also part of nature. And so you can learn so much just by observing and looking at how nature operates and how independent and yet interdependent all of nature is as well. And there's cycles to everything. And in the same way, I felt like there were cycles in my life. And so one thing I used to say to myself, looking in the mirror, crying every day when I was going through so much pain, was no matter how hard it gets, I am going to make it. And I just focused on 24 hours that were ahead of me. That's it. Because the next day wasn't guaranteed. So I was like, as long as I get through these 24 hours and I make it, that's all I have to do. And then it's less stress about what's going to happen a week from now. What happens 5 years from now? What if I never get out of this? I was just like, as long as I get through 24 hours, that's enough. I can deal with one day at a time. That seems a little bit more manageable. So it's just about having compassion for where you are and taking it one day at a time and navigating it the best you can. There is no silver bullet that's going to work for everyone, like a morning practice or a mantra or whatever. I can share with you what worked for me. It doesn't mean it's going to work for you. You have to find what works for you. But the thing I would invite people to remember is to have compassion as you're going through it, because even though it seems difficult in that moment, I'm sure there are moments in everyone's life in their past that they also found difficult, and yet they're still alive and breathing today, and they're going through life in a probably a more wiser and more knowledgeable way than they did for all of the times that they suffered before. So yeah.
I never heard that story, and I think that's a great story to offer the audience, because there's so much that happens behind the scenes in the higher realms in like energetic form before it actually starts to manifest into this reality, before you actually start to see the physical changes from all of the deeper energetic work, the emotional work, the mental work, all of the behind the scenes energy that is intangible, that we cannot see. It takes time, but once that's in place, the physical really does shift quickly.
Yeah, it's an anchoring now. And I can talk from hindsight, benefit of hindsight, and having sat with understanding what happened in the last decade, but it was anchoring my spirit, and it was the soul's growing pains essentially. And just like the sun sets for a period of time, it will rise again. And so, it's things like that that bring me hope, because I'm like, I am part of nature. And so I see that when it's the sun's time to shine, it will shine. And then its role is done for a number of hours, and it's the moon's turn. And in the same way, we go through periods of sleeping and waking because we need time to heal. So our body completely shuts off, and you have to sleep and shut down, like your conscious awareness is shut down. Because your body then takes over and begins to do all of its healing process. You don't really heal during the day. It's when you sleep, and the quality of your sleep dictates how deeply you actually heal. And so, in the same way, whilst we are alive from the macrocosm perspective, not just day by day, but like in chunks of our life, different seasons of our life, there are going to be periods where things feel really dark because your spirit is being anchored, and it's growing, and it's learning, and it's developing, it's encoding, it's downloading, it's growing and expanding. And then once that period is done, you'll start to feel, actually, I feel at home in myself. I feel at home in my body now. You'll start to get that feeling. I've started to get that over the last few years, bit by bit, like, oh, I finally feel comfortable in my own skin, literally. And from that place, your confidence starts to grow. You start to feel lighter in yourself, and you start to experience more joy and laughter and happiness. And not overnight, at least for me, but small parts of it begin to appear again, and you feel a lot more connected to yourself. And I think the experience that we have in life in general, whether it be relationships, work, working on our dreams and ambitions, all of that is a reflection of the quality of the relationship we have with ourselves. And so just giving compassion to yourself when you're going through difficult periods, knowing that it's only going to last for a season, and there'll probably be another season. Like you said, there'll be more than one dark night of the soul, or one or more of these cycles. And I've experienced that, right? So like I said, 2012 till 2019. And then in 2019, I went up for a little bit and then straight back down again. And it was deeper and darker, but in a different way. It wasn't physical this time. It wasn't in terms of my physical health. It was more emotional and spiritual. And we can get into that if we go in that
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I recently this week on my Instagram and TikTok posted a video talking about how it is often in our darkest hour that we meet our most illuminated self. And when you first got through like 2019 and you started to turn that corner, which was probably a quick turn in some ways, who did you start to recognize as yourself and that more illuminated version of yourself? Like, what did you start to experience and understand? And what was it like for you to meet that version of yourself?
I was excited for the first time actually, because for a long time I'd hated myself, and I'd finally started to come to a place now where I was feeling excited about who I was becoming, who I'd become, who I was becoming, and where my journey was taking me, because it was at an important point in my life, which I still refer back to this date, because I wouldn't be where I am now had those events in 2018, 19 not happened the way they did. And so the important thing that I realized at that moment was, as I was moving through the physical and learning to come home to myself, I could start to hear the voice of my body again, because I was reconnecting at a deeper level. And so what that means is I could hear the calling that I was getting. Wasn't this big prophetic message from God. It was just these small nudges of excitement to go in a particular direction. And I think that if we're quiet enough, you will hear them. You will feel them more so than hear them. Um, because they'll nudge you to go somewhere, to explore something, to go in a particular direction, which may not make logical sense, but only upon following it do you realize, actually this is continuing to expand my journey in a way that I couldn't have done before. And so for me, what happened in 2018 is I was working a job in the city, and that was after, so a number of years before that, I'd finished law school, started a bunch of businesses which all failed. So then I got a sales job, because I was like, the next best thing for me is to build my communication skills and um, people building skills, because it's something I'm good at. And if I'm going to get into a job, I want to do a role that's going to help me build skills that I can carry through in life. And whilst I was in that role, I felt the urge to attend an entrepreneurs event in Vegas called Thrive. And it was the most random thing, but not really, because some of the people who were attending as speakers, I'd been following in the personal development world for a number of years before that, because I'd seen their videos on YouTube at the time in 2012, 13, 14, when I was researching all of this stuff. So the seed had already been planted. So I was like, oh, I've been watching these guys. Wouldn't it be amazing to see them live, speaking? And one of the people who was speaking was a guy who is now my life coach, Philip McKernan, and he was an Irish coach who I'd seen an interview of his randomly in 2015, and it planted a seed, because I was like, upon all the people and all the books that I've read and videos I've watched, his energy was very different, and it just planted a subconscious seed of like, there's something to explore there. I don't know what it is, but there's something to be explored there. So in 2018, I attend the event, and I speak to a bunch of people who have attended, because I attended on my own. So I was talking to a bunch of people trying to make friends. No one had really heard of him as much as they had of all these other people who had really big profiles. And the handful of people that did, they said, "Oh, we've actually got an inner circle ticket, or whatever. And if we get a chance, then we'll introduce you to him and stuff. If we meet him over dinner." I was like, "Cool, that'd be great if that happens." So I go out with a bunch of friends one night, and we get back around 2 a.m. And the next day there was going to be a conference starting at 9 o'clock with the speakers. So I was like, guys, I'm going to go back home. Even if you carry on partying, I'm going to go back because I need to wake up early tomorrow. So I wake up a little bit late. I go down to get a coffee where I normally queue for coffee. And there was a massive queue. So I was like, oh shit, it's going to start in 10 minutes. Like, is it worth me waiting? And I remember there was a juice bar at the back of the hotel. So I run to the back of the hotel. I'm like, maybe it's quieter there. So I run down, and there's a big queue of people there as well. So I'm like, do I stay? Do I go? I don't know what to do. Something told me to stay. So I got in the queue, took my phone out and I was scrolling through emails just to pass some time before I got to the front of the queue. I looked up for a second and Philip was standing right in front of me in the queue. And I was like, okay, this is a sign from the universe. So I've got the person that I wanted to speak to is right in front of me now. Let me put my phone away. So then he turns around, we start talking, and I spoke to him about his talk from the night before. He offers to buy me coffee, and then we have a chat about my podcast, and he gives me his details. And a few months later, that was in September, and then in November we record a podcast. At the end of that, and this is November 2018, at the end of that, he says, you know, I really feel like you have a gift that needs to be explored. I want you to attend one of my events next year in January, and then think about doing a workshop live in London for the first time, because I'm thinking of setting something up there, and I'd love for you to speak there. And I was like, absolutely. I'm scared, but the fact that this has all lined up the way it has, absolutely, I'll do it. So I just kept leaning in. So I was like, there's a new version of me emerging with new confidence and excitement that I'm being directed now to do something else, to now explore purpose and gift in a new way, because all I've done up to that point is read about it. I'm like, what the fuck is my purpose? What is my gift? I was searching for all of these things in between doing the businesses, in between my job, but I never saw that as the end goal. The thing that was always in my heart was, what am I actually here to do? And that question, even though I couldn't formulate it at the time, that was the feeling I was getting in 2012 when my identity began to break down. It was like, okay, there must be a bigger reason for all of this stuff. What is that? And what's my role in it all? And having this conversation with him, I was like, okay, I'm clearly being shepherded in a particular direction. And there's a reason now I know why I saw his interview and I felt the way I did, because my soul already knew he's going to be one of the key players in your journey a few years from now. And so I meet him. Then January, I go to Ireland, go to the workshop. And then in June of 2019, I speak in London for the first time. It was optional to invite your parents, but I invited them to the talk. And that opened a whole can of worms, because I shared so much stuff that had happened in the last decade about me personally, not only with the relationship to myself, but with them, and how that brought up a lot in me. And then in between all of that, he'd invited me to a live immersive experience that he does called Brave Soul in July of that year. And I attended that as well. I was like, I don't have the money to pay for this, but I'm going to take out a loan and attend, because my soul is telling me I have to go there. I don't even know why. I have to. And that was transformative, because that was the first time I got introduced to deep emotional healing work, and the first time I got a chance to embrace my story and accept what happened to me these last 10 plus years. I mean, the 2012 onwards thing was one thing, but there was a whole life prior to that as well, which I didn't have a chance to reflect on because I hadn't slowed down enough to do that. One last thing to say on that is, at the end of that year, I'd also booked a trip to Peru to do ayahuasca. So that whole year, when you ask like who was I and what was happening at that time and how did I feel about it, I was feeling excited and expansive because I was being led in all these directions and everything was just working out. But it was heavy because of the conversations that were coming up as a result of the directions I was going in. But I knew that in the future, at that point, at some point, this is going to help me, because it's expanding my ability to have deeper and more expansive conversations in a way that is going to bring ancestral healing, because it's not just me, it's other people who've come before me and other people who are currently living alongside me that are involved in everything that's going on. So yeah, it was heavy, but in a very different way, like I said, emotional and spiritual at this point, and going deeper on those levels.
Okay, so much to unpack there. So you're going on your ayahuasca journey at what time? Is it in 2019?
It was November 2019, yeah.
Okay. So that is after you've experienced all these workshops and you've kind of invested in and all of that. And even just that point on its own, I think is important, because when you're starting to transform and you're starting to shed your old self, and we'll definitely get into the loss and the grief of really losing your identity and then reformatting it into a new one, rebuilding it. There's often times where, because we're changing our own personal value through our own identity, there are things that we have to shift in how we actually value ourselves, our lives, and our journey. And there's going to be moments in time where we have to really take a risk on how we're spending our money and where we're putting our money, even when we don't seemingly have it in that moment. And I mean, even myself, I've just recently gone through one of the most expensive years of my entire life. That's all been business and future related. And even just a few days ago, I had to like really invest another chunk of money that is putting me in a very scary place, because when you do that, obviously our money brings in a sense of security and safety. And so when we invested in something, even though we may be investing in something really valuable, it still creates a sense of shaky foundation within us. And there is a need of faith and an understanding to know that if you want to have a different life and you want to literally be a different person, not necessarily even just because you want to, but it's literally essentially you aligning to who you truly authentically are, you have to make choices and changes in your life that may cost you literally money in order to make that happen. And I think that can often be a hindrance for many people that stop them from actually taking that leap of faith, because they're losing that sense of security and safety.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so what we're talking about is it's individual in nature, because everyone's circumstances are going to be different, right? So I'm not telling everyone, get out alone and take action and make it happen and get into debt. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I got to a place personally where I couldn't not listen to the
Yeah.
voice. It wasn't about, if I invest the money, there's going to be great outcomes, and I've been promised amazing outcomes. It wasn't about that for me. It was like,
No.
I can't not. There's something pulling me that's beyond my ability to stop it. Like I'm so drawn to this. And you just know, when you know, regardless of your personal circumstances, you will find a way to make the thing work. And this doesn't even have to be financially. It could be any other obligations that the universe is asking you to put forward and to commit to. But you'll get a sense of like, this is so aligned to me that I can't not attend. I can't not take action on this, because you feel a sense of excitement and curiosity, and other people won't see that because it's not their journey. And the mistake I made at the time was I shared my thoughts at that time with someone who was a close friend and still is, but now I understand why he had the response he did about me spending this amount of money. And he said, "Oh, like, let's have a look at him online." So he looked up his profile and he wasn't that big. And he said, "Oh, I'm sure there's other like verified people that you could go for. His profile's not that big and he hasn't got that many followers compared to other people. Are you sure? Have you heard testimonials? All the usual stuff that people need for security." And it's totally understandable. But there's something still telling me, no, I have to. But I didn't know what was on the other side. So I could have easily been swayed by what he was saying, because it was all logical what he was saying. And yet now I talk from experience, having come out the other side. I'm like, I'm a different person. And I've met amazing people during that time who are now lifelong friends, one of which has just become a business partner as well, which just blows my mind. And all of the events that unfolded, a lot of them can be traced back to what happened in 2019 at those two particular events, me going to Ireland and committing to that 1 week, and then going to Peru as well. Again, both things weren't cheap, but I will caveat and say I did have a job. So my sense of security came from, whilst I don't have savings, I'm going to take out a loan, pay this whole thing, but at least I have a job that I can start paying. I can start paying in small chunks back over the course of 3 to 5, 6 years, whatever's easier for me. So it took off a little bit less burden, but that feeling of fear around, what am I actually going to get out of this? And how do I tell people that this is actually being productive and what actually I've come back with, because that's what a lot of people are afraid of, is like, what am I actually going to get from this? Is it actually going to be valuable? Because we try and pigeonhole what the success or the outcome is going to look like. And it's, for me, it's a lot more nuanced than that. It's not going to be black and white. Like, here's the top 3 things that I learned. Here's the secret that I've come back with. It's not like that. What happens is your soul shifts in the slightest of way, that the trajectory a few years down the line is going to be so far different to where you were that you're not even going to realize it was because of that. And because the outcome is not immediate, you won't be able to see and justify why you spent all that money. But inside you, you'll know that was the right decision to make. But you're not going to come back a changed person with a whole new life. That doesn't happen. If any program or anything is selling you, when you come back from this week or next month, that doesn't work. But what does happen is, if you, on a graph, right, if you shift the degrees just by a little bit, the further out it goes, the further away it was from its original point. And that's what's happened. Now I look back with the benefit of hindsight for the last 4 years. I'm in an entirely different place, and I'm so grateful for the people I've met and who I've become and what I've learned because of that year. And I think it's Rumi that says, there is a voice inside that speaks, listen. And that's what I've tried to do above all else, is be committed to that voice. What is the voice telling me? And that is what requires the silence and just slowing down and taking the time to feel into what it is that feels good to you. Because there's so many different options in the world that everyone is exploring. And because of social media, you see all of these different things working, and you can quite easily fall into a state of comparison, which I've done so much and still find myself doing. Is you recognize that whilst a business plan or an idea or a dream or an action plan can work for someone else, it doesn't mean that that blueprint's going to work for you, because your soul came here with a journey, with somewhat of a plan and a direction. And if it's not aligned to that, it's not going to work for you. And then you may be left thinking, like I was with the businesses that I started, why isn't it working? Because this person's making $5,000 a month, 10 grand a month. This person's retired. This person's like 25 and they're living an amazing life in Thailand. Like, where's mine? I don't get it. But that wasn't aligned to me. And now I see in hindsight, like, I'm so glad it didn't work out, because that was not part of what I was supposed to do. And I would actually be annoyed if I'd had a business that was completely out of alignment with me, and yet I have to run it. Like, it would be a chore. So just trusting that you're being guided in the right direction.
And that is such a huge part. And it's so important that the audience understands that by no means are you or I saying, like you said earlier, you put yourself into debt and just keep investing in yourself. At some point, you have to make some critical decisions along your journey. And what you're talking about is there's a couple of junctures in our life, more than a couple, but there are going to be junctures in your life where you hit a crossroads, and there literally is a decision that you will make that could absolutely change the course of your life. But it's not just that decision that changes the course of your life. It's every other decision you make with that decision that comes from, okay, once you start walking through on that new path, there are going to be subsequent other choices that you have to make. And it's like, are you going to keep following through? Are you going to follow and pull on that thread continuously? Or you might, again, you'll go down that path and then you hit another juncture. And now it's like, okay, there's another fork in the road. And I think that we come to these more often than we realize, that there are opportunities that are being handed to us, or I don't want to say handed to us, but they're designed, they're orchestrated divinely through our own soul's choices before coming in, as well as a universal plan that is far greater than any of us can comprehend in this moment in time. But it's about understanding that that path will start to change you, and you've got to be willing to move with those changes and understand that there's got to be some flexibility in whatever your vision was when you made that choice, that vision may start to shift and change and grow and evolve as you continue to grow and evolve. And listening to that voice inside is so paramount. You've obviously written a book about, being in silence and the importance of silence. And what has silence really gifted you and opened you up to into your internal world that has shifted your external world in ways that you didn't really conceive possible, or at least to the extent that it has.
So that I felt drawn in 2019 to sit more in silence and begin to explore what it was like to just be on my own. And that what that looked like for me was taking a few minutes in the morning to sit in silence, going on long walks without my phone, without headphones. I started doing Kundalini yoga more often, and I started to listen to more spiritual material. So for a point there, I stopped listening to a bunch of stuff, mainly personal development stuff, because that's what I was consuming a lot of at that time, which really helped expand and evolve my mindset and fed me in ways that I felt could only be satisfied by that content. Then it got to a point where I didn't want to listen to anything because I could feel things shifting, and my attraction to listen to the things I used to listen to wasn't there anymore. So the old desires started to fall away, and that indicated to me, okay, I'm beginning to change again now and evolve in new ways. So I was drawn more to spiritual texts and spiritual material, and I started to listen to a lot more of Ram Dass's lectures, for example. I really enjoyed how personable he is with the way that he explains spiritual concepts, but ties in a lot of his own personal life. So I was like, okay, this sounds accessible to me. So he was one teacher, but there were a few others that I would listen to as well. So in between all of that, I would put into practice what they would say as best I could to experience what they were talking about. Because it's one thing reading and listening to other people's version of the truth or what spirituality is, or what our true identity is. But it's another thing to experience it yourself. And so for me, if I don't experience something myself, it's not really my truth. I can't embody it unless it's coming from my own experience. And I think for me, that's where the difference between knowledge and wisdom is. For me, knowledge is learning from someone else, and it's someone else's wisdom coming into my reality. But wisdom for me, my definition of wisdom is what comes from you internally, and that can only come from within, and it comes from that place of silence. And so what that helped me do was just to begin to deepen my relationship with myself. So I began to let go of labels and all of the things that were distracting me. So an example would be, I was really, up to that point, I was really attached to listening to other people's opinions about personal development, i.e., what I should do with my life, what the definition of success is, and wanting a certain level of financial success and material success. And I held all these labels about who I was as well, as we all do. So, for example, son, brother, a law student, a business owner, coach, etc., etc. Like there's so many. I stripped all of those back, and then it got to the point where I was like, okay, let me strip back my personal identity, i.e., me being Indian, me being British, me being human. Let me strip back my name. And I got all the way back to this place where I was like, there's nothing. If I strip back everything, including my own body and my mind and my thoughts, and then the voice that's voicing those thoughts, it's just silence. And a sense of peace came from that, which I had never experienced before. So I was like, maybe this is it. Maybe this is what they're talking about. Like maybe I've touched on something here. And I began to be so interested in that. And I started doing it more and more often. And my brain's all over the place. I feel like I'm super creative. I have so many ideas and so many thoughts going on all at once. It doesn't always do me justice. So I have to find ways to practice self-care and silence in a way that works for me. I know some people sit like an hour in the morning, hour in the evening, which is great if you can do that. I can't. That doesn't work for me. I get irritated. So I do something that works for me. So 15 minutes is like, okay, I can do 15 minutes, right? So that was enough time for me to begin to explore what that silence was and that sense of peace. And actually, what came from all of these practices and doing all of this was a sense of freedom. Because I was like, who I am is not the way I look. It's not my outward achievements. It's not how old I am. It's not all of my track record. It's not how many followers I've got. So I began to feel free. I was like, none of this shit actually matters. Wow, like I'm eternal. None of this stuff matters. All of this stuff that I collect along the way is just to help me get from point A to point B. That's it. I'm not going to take any of it with me anyway. Um, and whatever happens next happens next. I don't know. But whatever I pick up, the sense of freedom came from knowing that it was temporary. So that's when that shift and that realization really began to set in.
Yeah, and that idea of everything is temporary too is there's a lot of relief in that. Because nothing will stay the same. Everything is always shifting, changing, growing, evolving, moving. And sitting in silence is extremely powerful, because I remember when I did my silent meditation retreat for 10 days, you really start to comprehend how noisy the ego wants your life to be, so that it can drown out that very soft and subtle voice of inner knowing. And when you understand how hard the ego will work to create distraction, to create noise, just so that you don't listen to that voice, you start to really understand again how powerful having a connection to that subtle voice is. And it can be the difference in trusting a decision that is very scary but could be the best decision of your life. And the ego will always want to keep you safe, but its version of safety is stagnancy. It's just stay with what you know. Even if you don't like what you know, we're going to stay here because you know it, therefore it's familiar, therefore it's safe. We know the game, we know the players, we can deal with it. But it's also usually filled with suffering and pain and unhappiness. So learning to drown out I shouldn't even say drown out the ego, but learn to put it at ease through silence, where it's not that, because I think the ego does play an important role in our journey. It's an important teacher because it provides that polarity that we need in this journey. But sitting in silence is very important. Your ayahuasca journey, what was that like for you? Because I've talked a lot about plant medicine over the last year on this podcast. I did my first ayahuasca journey in June last year. How transformational was that for you? Because I even know I have some clients who are embarking on ayahuasca, even as we speak right now. So, what was that journey like for you?
Yeah, but just before I get into that, I was just interesting as you were talking about the ego. What I was feeling is that the way that I view ego is that it's the personality that's created for us as we grow through the world, and it's all the inputs that we get about who we are in the world, because we essentially as kids learn from the outside world, like feedback of what's right, what's wrong, what we should and shouldn't be doing, and that's basically what creates who we are. And what I learned during that period and what I'm still learning is really to embrace the ego, because it's a part of you. And I think a lot of the conversations that happen in these circles is the ego is seen as something that's bad, and really suppressing any part of you is just creating more
Resistance.
yeah, it's creating more friction within you, right? So you're never really going to be free if you're trying to get rid of a part of yourself. And so it's about embracing and learning to have compassion for it and understanding what is it? What actually is it? It wants to be known and it wants to be given a voice. And once that you do that, it doesn't have power over you. Now you're studying it and working with it rather than pushing it away and trying to destroy it, because that will never happen. And it doesn't need to happen, because we need an ego to operate in this world. Unless you're going to go and live in a cave and that's going to be your life, that you need an ego to operate in this world. And one other thing to mention as well, like one of the things that comes up a lot in spiritual conversations is that now that we've used this term ego, this is why this is coming up, is we also have a spiritual ego for the people that obviously are involved in this kind of work. Is you begin to think, I'm going to destroy my ego. I'm going to do plant medicine. I'm going to sit in silence. I'm going to do these retreats and do all this work. And we don't necessarily consciously voice this, but what we start to feel inside is that we're better than everyone else, because we begin to embark on these practices that other people who are not woke are not doing. And I felt that as well. I felt myself criticizing internally other people, because I'm like, why the fuck aren't you doing this? Or well, I'm doing this, and if you did this, then you'd understand. And
that is a that's a survival mechanism of our ego. It's not even a spiritual ego, although like I completely understand what you're saying. It's more of the ego is very creative and will go to whatever means necessary to disguise itself to survive. And so what it will do is it'll put on that monk suit, or it'll put on like its halo in order to convince you that your ego is no longer around. And it's just a matter of masking. So yeah, our ego is very intelligent and creative, and what it's great at is survival. And that ego will do anything to survive. And so we have to be very aware of the many masks that our ego will wear, the disguises it will put on, so that we don't realize that it's still at the helm of our ship.
Absolutely. So with ayahuasca, it was just like the trip to Ireland. It was a strong calling that I had at the start of the year. And so I'll just caveat before getting into this conversation that, because people ask me, like, would you recommend it to me or to anyone else? Like, what are your thoughts on it? And how good is it? I'm like, those questions are irrelevant, because it's more to do with whether it's an inner calling or not. Are you drawn to it genuinely? Because it doesn't make you a better person, and it's not going to solve all of your problems. What it is just like everything else, is a tool to help you on your healing journey. If it's meant for you in this life, for some people, it's not. I've got many, many friends who are doing a lot of healing work without plant medicine. And then I have other friends who are doing it all of the time because they feel so called to it. They're hosting ceremonies and drinking themselves because they feel so deeply aligned to that work. And most of us are in between, right? We're thinking about it, we're drawn to it, we have questions and curiosity around it. But I would just say, unless you've got a deep inner calling to it, don't do it just because it sounds cool and you want to tick it off a list. For me, I went in November of that year and I sat 4 ceremonies in the jungle. I always felt like if I'm going to do it, I'm going to go there, and I want to be in the land and connected to the jungle and the people there. So the medicine was made by indigenous people from that part of the Amazon. And it was just amazing to experience that whole week in terms of not only the journeys, but the integration in between, the conversations, the exploration of the jungle, just connecting to nature. Again, it shifted me in small ways. I didn't have a vastly transformational experience in terms of going in and coming out and being a completely different person. It was only in hindsight, I was like, wow, this has actually shifted me in so many different ways. One of the things that stuck with me that illuminates that lesson is my really good friend Parker, who unfortunately passed away last year, he hosted the ceremonies in 2019, and I became really good friends with him as a result. One of the things he was saying is that 2% of the work is actually in the cup, what you drink. 98% happens in the integration afterwards. And so, just like I was saying earlier, in terms of like you live your daily life, the healing doesn't necessarily happen during the day. It's when you go to sleep. And so when I took the medicine, it was like being on nature's operating table, right? It was just like I was being worked on at such a deep level that I couldn't really put it into words. And so the first experience was, I don't know how deeply you want me to go into this, but I'll go through roughly what the 4 days looked like, and then if you have questions, we can go into it further. But the first day was it was blissful. I felt like it was an opening and an alignment of my internal energies, my internal soul to my body, to the vaster spirit, and I was just in bliss for most of it. That is how it felt, and I was almost drawn and forced to sit in a cross-legged position. And I sat there for I don't know how long. Time disappeared, and I vomited violently. But it's weird because even though the vomiting and the purging is bad, it felt good to me. Like I liked it because it was like a full clearing, a physical clearing. And because of the health stuff that had happened to me, I needed my gut to be clean. So I was like, this is good. This is acting as a disinfectant. It's getting rid of all that is not meant for me anymore. So I can anchor into this new body for the work that's meant to come in the coming months and years from now. So that was the first day. And then what I'd realized the second day was integration, and we weren't drinking on that day. I woke up annoyed, even though I had this blissful experience. I woke up annoyed because when I'd gone into the first ceremony, I had a whole list of questions I wanted answered. None of them got answered, but I was given this blissful experience. And so I'm thinking, why didn't it happen? I was so focused on what I didn't get versus what I was being given. And so that was a lesson in and of itself of appreciating and receiving what you're being given and trusting that you'll be given what you need, not what you want. And there's a big difference.
And Mother Ayahuasca, it was communicated to me that you don't get to choose what I open up for you and what I don't. And that is in itself a very humbling, like you said, lesson to go through, because we have these ideas of what we think we need versus what we truly need.
Yeah, and it was a lesson in just surrendering and letting go of control. And what I realized in that moment when we were sitting in the sharing circle was almost the voice that I had, the dialogue I had going on internally was like, how dare I think that I come into this world, and then 27 years later, I'm like, okay, yeah, I know exactly how this medicine works. I'm going to tell you what I want answered. You're just going to tell me, and this is how it's going to work. Versus this plant spirit that's been around for thousands of years, way before we could even comprehend what it was. And it has so much wisdom. And I think that I know better than it. So I was like, okay, that's a lesson in letting go of control and surrendering. And it's funny because a couple months right before going, I was introduced to two books that I still hold very closely to my heart, that I re-listen to over and over, is Autobiography of a Yogi and The Surrender Experiment. And those two books really shaped my perspective and view of life as I was moving through 2019 and coming into 2020, because they were all, essentially, if I was to boil them down, they were all about letting go of control and being guided by spirit, being guided by that voice. And those two stories show you in two different views of a protagonist how the stories unfolded for two different people in two different time periods. And it inspired me, and I connected to it because I was like, oh, this is what I feel like. I feel like I'm living this journey, my own version of this journey. And if they've done it, then I wonder where it's going to lead me, because obviously they're telling the story from having almost finished to some extent. So I'm like, okay, what if I keep following it? I wonder what would happen. And I started to rebuild my relationship with the unknown. Still very scary. I don't think that's ever going to go away. But what I learned to do was to lean into it rather than lean away from it. And so I was like, okay, I feel scared. I've acknowledged it. I feel it, but I can't not lean in, because what's the alternative? I sit in regret of not knowing what would have been behind that door this whole time. So I just continued to keep opening doors. Second, third, and fourth ceremonies. The second and third one were pretty intense. The second one especially was a lot of darkness and dark spirits and almost like witch-like faces coming towards me. And I wasn't scared though. I didn't have that sensation of fear. It was almost a sensation of love. I was being guided, again, without words and dialogue. It was just a feeling, being guided to embrace it. So I embraced them all, embraced them, just with a smile. So each time I would smile at each face, it would just disappear and dissolve. So I was like, okay, this is working. And so the more I smiled, the more they disappeared one by one. And I realized that they were all essentially parts of me that I had pushed away, that I disregarded, that I had compartmentalized and removed. And I was like, well, I got to start embracing all these parts of me. I don't know what they are. They don't have names yet, but they're all versions of me within me. And I think we all have these different hats that we put on throughout our lives in different situations to present ourselves in a certain way in the world, to feel accepted, essentially. And deep down, we're afraid that if we don't show up in a particular way, we're going to be rejected. And then we're left remembering the feeling of rejection. And it kind of reinforces the story we have about why we're not good enough anyway. It was definitely the case for me. And so it was going through this process of just fully embracing and coming back to myself. Again, I purged and vomited, puked, shit myself. That happened like all 4 times. And I wasn't surprised because it didn't happen for everyone. I think for most people that I was weird. First and second time, third and fourth, the room was a lot quieter in that sense, but I just kept going. I was like, well, it's obvious because my body had been so um, physically damaged that there's a lot of stuff that needs to be removed, toxins and germs, etc. And then the third and fourth one felt more like integration in terms of opening the heart space, seeing so many more visuals, and then lots of little doctors. I forgot the name. Do have a name, but like lots of little like cartoon doctors that would walk into my heart and just like do like work around it and expand it. And you just had to trust. Like none of this stuff made sense, but in hindsight, I trusted that it was all working to the benefit of whatever my soul needed. And so every time I went up to drink, you have to set an intention. And my intention, the first one, I can't remember exactly what I said. It was probably something about wanting all my questions answered, but I'd learned my lesson. So the second, third, and fourth, I said, I'm open to receiving whatever you have to teach. And I tried my best to embody the feeling as well. I didn't just want it to be lip service. I was like, I really just let go. I thought about if none of these questions get answered, would I still be happy? And I said, yes, I would. I don't have to know the answers. You just show me what you need to show me. Um, and yeah, I took copious notes and all that kind of stuff. And so that throughout that year, there were so many journal notes that come up, not only from Ireland, but from the journey with ayahuasca. As I entered 2020 and sat more in silence during lockdown, I reviewed all of these notes. And that's how I ended up writing the book as well, because all of these new insights had been bubbling to the surface.
Yeah, the little part where you had the little doctors coming into your heart. It's interesting because, yeah, we literally go through metaphysical open heart surgery in moments like that. And we have no idea exactly what's happening. And that's what's I find so interesting about plant medicine, just in general, not only ayahuasca, but there truly is a purging of the unconscious. There's a purging of the energetics, all the things that we just cannot see, or that we're not aware of. And to know that we have these tools available to us, and if you feel called to it. And I think it's important, again, that everyone understand that if you're not feeling called to it, there's nothing wrong with you. Like there's not, you shouldn't need to be called to it. This is totally a very personal journey. And the journey in itself of going inward is extremely personal. And whoever you choose to bring with you, whatever teachers you choose to bring in, whether they're plant medicine or an actual teacher, or, past versions of yourself from other lives, guides, it's all valuable. And there's not one way that's better than the other. It's truly dependent on what resonates for you. And you shouldn't do anything that deeply personal unless you feel very called to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It is a personal journey. I think we all have to remember that there is no right and wrong. It's just
Mm-hmm.
listening to what feels good to you in every moment. And that can change as well, right? Because we're always growing, evolving, changing. It's the only constant there is. And so what you're drawn to in any moment in your life can also differ.
Yeah. And you've recently been going through some experiencing grief and loss, and it's something, like you mentioned to me too, that quite a few people are experiencing this in their life. And I would agree with you, because I'm seeing it in my life and everyone else's life that is very close to me, that there is some sense of loss and grieving happening. um what is what has the grieving process done for you or showed you because obviously it can be very painful, but there are also gifts that come with the grieving process.
I literally wrote an article and have created a workshop that I delivered last week called The Gift of Grief.
Oh,
And
really?
it's for that. Yeah, that's what it's
Oh
called.
God,
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So yeah, when my first experience of grief unconsciously, and I'm only able to put words to it now because of the benefit of hindsight, is in 2012 when I was physically witnessing a version of myself dying and rotting away physically in the mirror. I'm like, what is happening right now? And I shed tears, but I didn't know to put the word grief to it because I didn't understand that concept at the time.
Mm.
And then so before I go into a story of how I lost my friend last year as well, for me, in my experience, grief has come up in three different ways, and I'm sure it's applicable to every human being on the planet in some way. You will lose a person physically to death. There'll be an ending of physical relationships in some shape or form with people who are still alive, and so that might be a marriage, might be friendships, might be brotherhood or sisterhood in some capacity. And thirdly, there'll be a letting go of a dream, a desire, an experience, a material possession. All of those are still a reason to grieve because you're having to let go of something. All three of those together or individually are to do with letting go of an old personality that you once had, shedding an identity essentially. And so for me, grief has showed me two things. One, grief is the awareness of change, that something is being shed and it's being basically the universe is creating room for something new to grow.
Mm.
And two, which is the lesson I learned last year, is that grief is also the other side of love, and that both of them come hand in hand. You cannot have love without grief and grief without love. It is interwoven. It's in the DNA, just like the DNA helix is interwoven. That's exactly what grief and love is. Because when I lost my friend Parker, who I met in 2019 in the jungle, um, we became super close and we were messaging and talking throughout lockdown. He was in lockdown in Peru for a long time, which was really isolating because they were super strict there. And he was basically in a hut for a very long time. And then he managed to get back to the States to his family. We talked on WhatsApp calls, all that stuff. And then I let go of an identity of mine last April and I left my corporate role. I felt it was time to move into a new identity and start embracing my own gifts even more. One of the first trips I made was to Austin, Texas, where he was, and I did a private Wachuma ceremony with him for a couple of days. And we got to spend 2 whole days together. I went to a bunch of other places after that and saw friends and stuff. And then 6 months later, in September, we caught up. We hadn't really spoken in that time, but we wanted to have a really big catch up after so many months had passed, just to see where we were at in life. So we spoke on WhatsApp. We did a WhatsApp call for about 2 hours and spoke about everything and anything. And we ended that call with so much gratitude and love for one another. And then 6 days later, after that call was Wednesday. Tuesday, he left his body unexpectedly, and there was nothing wrong with him. When I spoke to him on Wednesday, he'd had essentially a freak accident when he went diving that weekend on the Sunday, and he'd hit his head on a cement block and severed his spinal cord, and that was it. He was gone, and he was paralyzed, and he made the decision to come off the ventilator. So I'd received all of this via text from a mutual friend, and I was like, what is happening? My body's in shock. I was crying. I was like, I can't even get there on time because by the time I go there, he's going to be off the ventilator. So is there a point? Am I a bad friend? I had all these questions, thoughts going through my mind. So losing him, I realized so many things, but one of the things talking about grief and love was I grieved so deeply because I loved him so deeply and still do. And because that grief was so deep, it showed me the capacity to which I was able to love and have my heart open. Because you can only grieve something that you have love for, that you have some sense of attachment to.
Mm-hmm.
And only when that thing changes its form or its relationship to you do you realize how open your heart was to that person or that experience or that situation. And so that's why I um realized that this may actually be a gift because it's expanding my ability to feel as a human being. And isn't that what we're here to do, is to feel the fullness of the human experience, essentially, regardless of whatever you do with your time here, it's to feel the fullness of what it means to be human.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, maybe this was his last lesson to me, was a lesson in grief. And in that way, it's a gift. And so then I wrote an article called The Gift of Grief. And actually, it was a letter to him. And it was just meant to be therapeutic for me. And I was like, actually, this could probably benefit people. And maybe someone else is going through something and they could resonate with this. So I published it. And I was really proud of it. And then as the universe or has orchestrated a bunch of unseen things at that time, it kind of set me up to then deliver some workshops around grief for a bunch of organizations and individuals that required that support. And I was like, I never saw this coming. I didn't ever think that I was going to be doing work in the space of grief and holding space for that particular emotion. Um, and I think that, no, not I think, I know that that experience alone, along with all the other stuff that happened to me, but that particular experience, because he was so close to me, I got firsthand experience of feeling it so deeply that it almost set the foundation for me to be able to do this work for other people. And so the more I look at it, the more I'm like in awe of how carefully orchestrated everything had happened, because the timing of events is indescribable, like the perfection of it all, how it's helping me to do my work in more deeper and deeper ways and helping me to expand my ability to be human and serve in the highest way that I can. So the more I look at it, the more it is a gift. Absolutely.
So much of our trauma as children and just coming into this world starts with the point of pain where we're not allowed to fully feel and we're not allowed to fully express our emotions. There's only certain emotions that are allowed and acceptable within maybe perhaps a family, within society dynamics. And this is a major lesson for all of us that all of us have to go through. And you made a very important point that you can't love deeply without understanding or knowing grief deeply, because you're right, the human experience is very much founded in our emotional existence. The human being as a species is extremely powerful because of our ability to feel so deeply. And when we try to limit certain emotions, what we don't realize that we're doing is that we're actually limiting our ability and capacity to experience the ones we actually really want to experience. And so oftentimes with working even with clients, what we have to do is start to accept and be okay with moving through the emotions that are painful and allowing yourself to feel the pain deeply, to feel the fear deeply, to feel the loss deeply, because only once you are able to do that will you truly be able to feel joy. Will you truly be able to feel love? Will you truly be able to feel peace? And you can't have one without the other, as you said. And this is a very, very crucial, important wisdom and deep understanding that one will inevitably come to in their journey when they're ready to truly be happy and be joyful in their lives. And like, even just for myself, very recently, I was going through some deep fears. Fears were triggered. And I also realized that I felt very lonely. And there was a sadness deep within me that I was trying to push down in order to get through a very deep challenge. And I had to stop myself and kind of go inward and really tune into that little girl inside who was feeling alone and feeling sad. And it's like, you know what? I feel sad. It's okay. I can feel sad and I can feel alone and it's okay. And I just gave myself that moment that night to feel those emotions fully. And when I did, the next day I came out of it going, okay, now I'm ready to move forward in a way that allows me to truly embrace what it is I'm working so hard for. And denying those parts of ourselves and those feelings only suppress the really good ones that we are striving so hard to have a bigger capacity to feel. And you won't experience that at the capacity that you really want to if you're not okay feeling really vulnerable and feeling sad sometimes and feeling deeply in fear. And our instinct is to run away. Our instinct is to push away. But so much of our ability to have the dreams and to live in those dreams is dependent on our willingness to be okay and accept that these feelings are just as valid and just as important to the human experience. And because we're such incredibly powerful beings, I think our DNA, our skin suit provides us with a technology that will allow us to create things well beyond what I think any of us can imagine at this point. It truly lies that technology, the power of this technology lies in our capacity to feel those emotions deeply.
Mm. Well, I just want to take a moment to honor the fact that you gave voice to that, because I could see there was like sadness rising in your eyes as we were opening up this conversation and going in this direction. I don't know exactly what was coming up for you, but obviously it was something that you'd held so close to your heart and deep for a long time. But I just want to acknowledge that because it's not something that is easy to do, to voice an emotion, to give voice to an emotion that isn't easy to experience. So
thank you. I appreciate that. To me, it's so important to express vulnerability, even on my podcast with my audience. They know this. And because it's a part of me, and being authentic on this journey requires to show all of the parts that some of us feel are not even part of a journey that is of high value and worthiness of living. And these are just parts of the challenges that we all have to go through in order to, like I said, experience what it is that we're striving so hard for in our lives. But we cannot deny. Denial is what shuts down our sacral chakra. Denial is the wound of the sacral chakra, which is the home of the inner child. It is also the home of our creativity, our passion, our desire for all that we dream. And when we deny things of us, we inevitably are now holding a frequency that doesn't actually allow us to have what it is that we want, because we're in that denial frequency. So being okay and being in that state of allowance, which is very much sacral chakra energy. And I'll keep going back to this because I think it's really important for people to remember that the greatest shifts in our lives that we experience happen when, one, we have great awareness of ourselves, but also when we're in that creative flow. And that creative flow is so important in the health of our sacral chakra. And when you're in a state of denial, you're shutting that down. So thank you for even just for giving me the space to share this. And for the audience, this is, I'll always keep it real with you. I'll always keep it real with you, because this journey is always of peaks and valleys. And you can experience both at the same time. You don't have to be in one or the other. You can be in both, and it's okay. It's okay. And I think that more than anything is to understand that if you are holding a frequency where you're resisting something or denying something, that frequency will permeate into other areas that you actually are trying to pull towards you.
Yeah, that last bit is important, which is what I was going to touch on, is like, first of all, it's knowing that it's okay to experience other emotions than the ones we're taught that are good or positive, let's just say, right? And I think there's something in embracing the wholeness of who you are that is very liberating. And as a byproduct of doing that, you then open yourself up to receiving all that you were meant to receive. But the lesson isn't in the receiving, it's in the embracing and becoming who you are to then receive. The receiving part is a bonus. That doesn't matter. That's the icing on the cake. That's what we all came here to experience, is to be human, being human. And the part that is showcased, unfortunately, by social media. And social media is great, just as with anything, it's the intention with which you use it and the boundaries you set. But one of the things that fuels this behavior that we're talking about is because you see all of the external appearance of the good emotions, right? You see the snapshot of the cars and the houses and the couple goals and this, that, and the other. And you think that's the human experience. I want to strive to that. But what you don't see is not only that is only a snapshot and you don't know what's actually happening behind the scenes. Two is that it's in the embracing of all of the emotions, not just the ones that seem happy. The human experience isn't just about striving for the happy emotions and to live a happily ever after life. It's actually about embracing your story and who you are in your fullness. And that requires courage, that requires vulnerability. But off the back of that comes freedom, comes authenticity, comes inner strength, that comes access to light that you didn't have access to before, because you think it's counter to your logic. You're like, why? Like, I'm trying to strive towards the light. Why would I embrace the dark? It's in embracing the dark that the light then shines afterwards, because by suppressing any part of you, you will suppress the whole of you. That's what ends up happening, unfortunately. And I think that the journey isn't about the end goal. It's about the journey itself. The journey is the destination, as they say. So there was something else I was going to say. I've kind of forgotten. If it comes back to me, it comes back to me. But yeah, actually, I know what it is. I wrote an article recently called on Substack called "It Ends with You," and it was about ending ancestral cycles and healing. Something that I've gone through recently. I texted you to reschedule this because I was in the thick of it all a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I think so often we strive for the future and ignoring what's happened in our past because we think the past is the past, that's where it stays. That's true. But at the same time, not, because who you are is made up of all the moments that happened before you got here. It's impossible to part ways with what happened to you before. And so it's similar to what you and I were just saying about wanting to embrace the bits that feel good and feel easy and comfortable, and not embracing the parts of you that are equally important but are scary because they feel darker and heavier. And they only feel darker and heavier because you're suppressing them. By embracing them, it becomes easier to embody. And then it becomes freeing, because then you're able to use that as a form of healing. Should you choose to share your story, other people feel inspired to realize, actually, maybe I do have the courage to embrace what happened to me, because what happened to you happened to me. I've seen it so many times. By sharing something, people are like, that is what happened to me.
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't talk about this with anyone else. It's so nice to know that I'm not alone, etc., etc. And so that's what it's about. It's about connecting at a human level, realizing that we're all the same and we're all different at the same time. We live in a world of duality. You can't just strive for light and ignore the darkness. And you don't want to stay in the thickness of the past and continue to repeat in your mind, I need healing, I'm fucked up, there's so much wrong with me. Like, that's also bad. Like, realize that there's a push and pull, there's seasons to everything, there's cycles, there's ups and downs, peaks and valleys, like you said. just have compassion for yourself as you move through all of this, and to know that there's layers to everything as well. It's not just black and white.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot of gray tones.
Yeah.
There's a lot of gray tones to move through there. And I think that it's something that I hope everyone can take away from this episode, is to know that no matter where you are at in your journey, as much as we do this healing journey to move away from the state that we're finding ourselves in, healing is truly not about removing your pain. It's about repurposing your pain. Those experiences are with you for a reason. To deny them existence would take away the golden gift that sits in it. And so often, the things that are most valuable about who we are probably some of the ugliest parts of ourselves we've denied. And we need to reclaim those parts, invite them back home, allow them to return from exile, and to repurpose everything. And it's like, even just what you've been through with your friend and experiencing that deep loss. For me, just being able to share a moment that I had literally last week, and to basically take that pain and repurpose it into being vulnerable and sharing. Like you said, it's all about human connection. It's vulnerability. It requires, or I shouldn't say requires, but it does require, but it also invites intimacy. And intimacy is what is lacking in our world so much, because everyone's afraid of what happens when you go deeper and you actually pull back the veil and you pull back what's hiding below the surface. But creating moments of intimacy is, I think, crucial to the health of our society and moving us forward in a direction that actually brings us closer together instead of so far apart, especially after what we've all been through with 2020, in where there was so much separation and so much fear and so much unknown, that at this point we can bridge that gap through moments like this and opportunities like that. And there's always a way to take your pain and repurpose it into a bridge that brings someone perhaps some relief, or even just brings you closer to someone else and them closer to you.
Absolutely. And I think what's behind, the fear of unmasking how you feel and going deeper is ultimately you think that you'll be rejected if you share who you really are. The parts of you that you don't think are worth presenting to the world are actually the parts that will connect you more deeper to the world. That's what I found in my experience. And without going into this in detail, because I'm conscious of the time, and I know that this conversation could probably go on a lot longer, is the two things that have, the three things that have really shaped the darkest parts of me that I'm learning to embrace is the health thing was massive, and how I actually felt about myself. The second thing, which happened prior to that when I was much younger, is being on the other side of sexual abuse and not knowing how that had shaped me until recent years of exploring that and realizing, oh, this is affecting me in ways that I didn't want to believe, but I'm going to have to embrace and learn to work through. And then 3, losing my dear brother last year and learning what it meant to experience grief and learning to cry and learning to hold space for myself and learning to be patient and compassionate with myself in a completely different way to what I had to be when I was going through the health stuff. And so there's so many other things that have shaped me as well, but those 3 things have been big milestones in my journey, and I've had to learn to embrace those. And opening conversations up around each of those 3 have definitely allowed me to connect more deeply with other human beings.
Well, I would love for my audience to be able to connect with you. So please let them know where they can find you. And if they have any desire to work with you or learn more, follow your articles, where can they find you?
Yeah, so the best places are Instagram at Vipul Bhesania. I'm quite active on there. TikTok at Vipul Bhesania, same name. Substack, my newsletter is called Soul Wisdom, and it's free. You can find it on the link to my Instagram anyway. And then vipulbhesania.com to find out how you can work with me. There's two ways primarily that I'm doing that, is one-to-one if people choose to do that, or I'm launching a group program in May for a select group of people to dive deeper, to explore everything that we've talked about. So thank you so much for taking the time to have me. It's been amazing, and you've been a great host.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. And to my audience, I love you guys so much. Thank you for your continued support, for always giving me and my guests the space to share our journeys and our stories. And I hope that you are doing the same for yourself in your own life in some capacity. If you enjoyed this episode, and I know you did, please share it with your family and friends. And if you haven't already, please leave a star rating on Spotify or on Apple. It would greatly help the podcast grow. And you can also leave questions in the Spotify section under the Q&A and leave your comment there. I love you guys, and I will be back with you next week. Thanks again for joining me for another show on the Enlighten Up podcast. I love you guys so much for all of your continued support. So remember to raise your vibe, find your tribe, and be open to the infinite possibilities held in the mysteries that surround us all. Thanks again for sharing the show with your family and friends. And if you're new to the show and you need to find out more information about me, please head on over to my website, NicoleFrolick.com, where you can join my newsletter. And please follow me on Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube. Keep your light bright, and I'll see you next week.